Okay, so the real aviation nerds should know why the local Dayton paper cares about F-35s. Anybody?
Dude, anybody can be an aviation enthusiast.
Right, that's the only connection I see.
Right, Pat. Yeah, just checking. F-35B was lost for days in September following a malfunction that forced the Marine Corps pilot to eject in rural South Carolina. It was a high-profile embarrassment for the U.S. Department of Defense, but it's far from the only negative attention. The GAO, the Government Accountability Office, released a report in May noting the F-35, the Department of Defense's most expensive weapon system, is more than a decade behind schedule and $183 billion over original cost estimates. When critics look at the F-35, they say they see an increasingly expensive plane plagued by software problems and too many contractors at cross purposes. In short, a program trying to be all things to all services and all allies. When advocates consider it, they see an immensely powerful weapon with cutting-edge sensors offering pilots an unparalleled view of battlefields, attracting orders from allies and envy from foes. This is actually a highly successful program. Lauren Thompson, a defense industry analyst and Chief Operating Officer of the Lexington Institute in Northern Virginia, told the Dayton Daily News, the fighter meets all of its requirements for survivability and lethality while costing less to build than a Boeing 737. There's a lot more to this article. Do you want me to keep reading or do you want to pick it up there?
No, we can pick it up there. Now it gets into the mishap and stuff. So
yeah, there's a good chart at the end here. I'll just put that on the screen.
On screen.
How are we comparing what it costs to build an F-35 and a 737? That's the dumbest.
That's how expensive the 737's gotten.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're Lockheed, or I mean, it's like, hey, I'll sell you this jet for $1, knowing that the next 25 years I'm going to make $10 gazillion off you in delays.
In fairness, that aircraft has a very high FMC rate, so it's
58%.
How does it compare to like the Viper and the Hornet during the same time period?
Wow.
Is it?
Yeah. At one point, though, it was in the high 60s, wasn't it? Or did the article?
That article there said 58%, and I read a different one said 55%. It's in the 50s.
Okay. Wasn't the F-22 about the same?
Well, that was different because the F-22 had no parts, which this one seems to have the same problem.
Right.
No parts. But there was no assembly line. And then, LO is very expensive to maintain. It's very hard to upkeep. Every time something happens, perhaps it falls off of part of your plane and ingests into the engine. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen with that. But, I mean, it's a different aircraft. It's a different mentality. You're a systems operator more than, you're going out pulling G's, being a fighter pilot, because that's why we have T7 and all the avionics and stuff like that. We've talked about this a little bit ad nauseum as far as the different mindset that you have to have when you're flying a 5th gen JSF.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not picking on Lockheed, but I think they just bit off more than when you look at from an engineering standpoint, you're trying to build an airplane that can land on ships, Air Force thing, do the hover, replace the A-10 and the F-15 or whatever. I mean, dude, that's a tall order, and I get it. They probably, but the cost to do that, man, is crazy, and all the details, right? I mean, it's a huge
look
order.
at the supply chain issues we've had in the last 3 years,
right?
4 years. I mean, it's not in a vacuum.
Not save this plane though,
right?
Yeah,
you're right.
But I do think it exacerbates a lot of it when you have supply chain issues, chips, workers going on strike, all the stuff.
Doesn't make it easier.
No, it doesn't make it easier. And also, unchecked inflation where everything costs more. So every time it does an overrun, they have to go back and get more money. And, it becomes this big thing. Meanwhile, who suffers? The people flying the A-10s and the older F-16s, because what are they replacing it with? That they're not getting. Look at Tyndall, dude. Look how long it's taken them to get 2 jets.
10 years behind that's a long time.
Yeah.
The thing about this though is it has nothing this isn't Lockheed. I mean, I agree with Gonky. This is a mentality of our government, our military. That's what failed, because it's this mentality of a jack of all trades, master of none type of thing, where it can land on a ship and then it can also land in a field while some Marine refuels it in some country, which is the most ridiculous premise for a plane that expensive. And then also the Air Force guys can joyride it after their round of golf. Like, you can't fit one aircraft into those three missions, right? Because if you could, there wouldn't be a Marine Corps, a Navy, an Air Force. Like, there's a reason we have multiple services. It's because they all do things very differently, and they have different roles, and they have things that they're very good at and other things that they're not good at. And let's be honest, Gonky, you and I flying off a ship in a Hornet, we were really good at doing stuff, but we were really not good at other things that Air Force aircraft could have a field day on.
Other than
Way
landing.
better.
And so you're taking this, and we saw it on a smaller scale in the Navy. Now, I think Boeing's done a much better job with it, but on a smaller scale in the Navy, where they lost, let's get rid of Tomcats, S3s, you know, all this stuff, and we're just going to have a Hornet and then a Super Hornet. It's like, whoa. Like, that's ridiculous, because now we've overhoured our Super Hornets because they've been tanking on 5 wets and coming in 904 because they're heavy. That's not what they were intended to do. So now you're just putting this on a bigger, something that was a Navy problem, and I'm sure the Air Force has this as well. But they've now it's transcended the Navy. It's now all of the services, and it's like, this isn't a Lockheed thing. This is a warrior fighting spirit mentality of, you know, if this is how you think your spirit is going to be, then stop building aircraft carriers, stop doing all this stuff, and have one military that does the same mission. But that doesn't work.
It did mention in the article that, you know, clearly the decision makers 20 years ago probably didn't make the right choice, and a lot of it, Wombat's kind of wrapped around what you're talking about. I mean, at the end of the day, I think they just bit off way more than they could chew. And it mentions in that article too, I think that's why the B-21 and the NGAD they're not doing the F-35 like way of doing business. They've learned. They've learned, thankfully. And hopefully the next iteration won't be as much of a.
Yeah, but at what cost? 183 billion over.
Drop in the bucket.
Like,
1 million.
Mover, you talk about insane inflation. Well, gee, I wonder why. Like, that's insane. Like, that's.
I blame Fat Amy for inflation. You heard it here on the Mover Gonky show.
Yes.
To the bottom of the ocean. To the bottom of the ocean.
I just don't. 183 billion over. Like, over what? What was the initial bid? I'm curious. Does anybody know? Because, like,
probably 1 billion. I don't know.
Anyway, so that was great. Thank you for that.